Humans are animals, and in the wild, there are predators and there are prey. We form families and build homes to protect each other from most dangerous predators. But for Nikki, Sammy, and Tori, they were hunted by a predator that lived inside of their home. They were born to Michelle Shelley Knotek, a mother so evil she made Casey Anthony look like Mother Goose. When your mother is a narcissist and a serial killer, the day of your birth is nearly the start of your life sentence. Michelle's mother was a drug addict and a sex worker, and it wasn't until she died that Michelle found a loving home with her father and her stepmother. But by then, it was way too late. On a good day, she would sneak broken glass into the shoes of her family members. On her worst day, she claimed to school officials that her father sexually assaulted her. But the story couldn't be less true if it came out of Cat Williams' mouth. After her father was taken into custody, they found a magazine in Michelle's room with the headline, "I was raped by my father at 15. Michelle would continue to abuse her family. By the time that she was 18, her dad had had enough. He hired one of Michelle's close friends to actually work at his business. This was so he could get him to eventually date and marry his daughter. He tried to raise Michelle in a loving home, but the streets were her natural habitat. After they got married, her father was so happy because if you can't get a refund on a bad kid, marrying them off for store credit is the next best thing. But Michelle couldn't keep a good man in her life, and she had super glue in her pussy. She went through 2 husbands before the third one stuck. In all her marriages, the men would be beaten, yelled at, and had their paycheck taken from them. She was like Jada Pinkett Smith, but with more hair. From the 3 marriages, she gave birth to 3 daughters, the eldest being Nikki, followed by her younger sister Sammy. And after meeting and marrying Navy vet Dave Knotek, she'd have her final child, Tori. I'm a feminist. I believe that the things that we say to women in our society aren't necessarily to demean and belittle them. But if you gotta call one woman a bitch, there's no better target than that bitch Michelle. Anyone that spends more than 5 minutes in her home gets abused. That bitch is going for the Harvey Weinstein speed run. Every one of her husbands would recall being beaten, yelled at, and having their money stolen from them. But for the kids, Michelle was much worse. According to the eldest Nikki, one night when she was very little, she was asleep. Then suddenly a pillow was placed over her head, slowly smothering the young girl. After the initial shock of waking up to a pillow blocking her windpipe, she would struggle. She'd grasp for air for quite some time before the pillow was suddenly removed from her face. Her mother would then approach her in bed and ask her what was wrong. When Nikki tried to tell her mother about how she was almost suffocated, Michelle just looked at her, confused, and reassured the young girl. Nothing happened. I'm going to be honest, this was the most tame form of child abuse these girls went through. Michelle Knotek makes a trip on Epstein's airplane seem like a walk in the frickin' park. For everyone else in her home, Michelle was fine drugging them, beating them, and starving them. But the tool that she used most consistently as a form of punishment was called graveling. She'd pick a child, and that child would be forced outside naked in the cold night and forced to roll around in the mud like a pig, while Michelle, Dave, or one of the other children sprayed them with cold water. Most of this abuse, of course, would be kept behind closed doors. To the rest of the world, she was a charming, beautiful mother. Michelle was so great at maintaining this facade that she would be entrusted with Dave's nephew, Shane. Shane Watson's father was in prison, and his mother couldn't take care of him. The Knotek family agreed to accept Shane into the family with open arms. But the second Shane entered that home, Michelle was swinging like she had a pineapple on her front porch. was around the age of Nikki. Since they were the oldest children, they would get the brunt of the abuse. Sometimes it was violent beatings and starvations. Other times it was demeaning sexual things. Michelle would force Shane and Nikki to basically slow dance naked in the middle of the living room while she watched. She'd force them to shave their pubes and hand them over to her. Shane had it the worst out of all the kids because he'd fight back. He'd run away. That boy was a little Kunta with less melanin. Michelle would always find him. The entire family would be forced into the back of the car and hunt down Shane all day and all night until they found him. One night they were up until 3 a.m. looking for Shane. Michelle knew two things. Shane knew practically no one in their small rural community. And two, he had nowhere else to go. Michelle would search for Shane harder than I search for white women on Tinder. When Shane was found, the punishment was cruel. Being forced to gravel naked in the mud, beaten brutally, or taped to the wall naked for hours. But in Shane lived the spirit to rebel, to oppose the cruel, and to seek justice. To a narcissist like Michelle, Shane was a silver bullet, waiting for an opportunity to take her down. The one way to break a good man is to force him to do bad, or marry a Kardashian. But the Knotek couldn't afford that much plastic, so Michelle did the next best thing. She brought in Kathy Loreno into the family. Kathy was a family friend of Michelle. She was a hairdresser who was trying to further her education, but unfortunately, she had fallen on bad times. Kathy needed a place to stay. Michelle was more than happy to trap another victim in her home. At first, Michelle showed love and care to Kathy. She was sort of like a mother to her at first. But that would not last long. Michelle began showing concern for Kathy's weight, and one night she attacked Kathy while she slept. Michelle claimed Kathy was sleep-eating and stole all the food in the fridge, and after attacking Kathy, Michelle would begin sobbing and claiming Kathy was dangerous and going to harm the family. She didn't stop. Michelle would feign that she only did this because she cared for Kathy. Kathy began apologizing and comforting Michelle while she fake sobbed. That was her one mistake, because from that day on out, she'd be treated even much worse. Throughout her stay, Kathy would lose her dignity. She'd lose 100 pounds, her teeth, her job, and even the clothes off of her back. Dave regularly worked 90 hours a week outside of the home. By the time he returned home, Dave was more sucked dry than anyone sharing a camera with Mia Khalifa. Dave was a husk of a man. After years of being married to Michelle, maybe at one time he was a good man, but now he obeyed his wife without a second thought. Michelle told him to build a torture rack. She claimed Kathy was dangerous and disrespectful, and they needed to teach her to behave. The rack was used to strap Kathy down naked, while Michelle submerged Kathy in water, essentially waterboarding the young woman. The kids were forced to watch and sometimes participate in this. Kathy would later then be forced to crawl on all fours naked. Sleep in the shack outside of the home. She was regularly drugged, deprived of water and food. While this was going on, the family would pretend to be normal. Actually, one day, Kathy got loose of this torture rack, and she tried running away from Michelle. Nick and Sammy were boarding the bus, and some of her classmates caught sight of Kathy running naked across their property. And rumors around the school quickly spread. The only thing that could spread around that school quicker than those rumors is Drake's DNA. Michelle covered this up by claiming she was shocked while using her outdoor bath. The whole community believed her. No one had even seen Kathy outside of the home before. Essentially, they hid her away. Whenever the family went on vacation, they would load the sick, feeble Kathy into the trunk of the car. Shane tried the best that he could to save Kathy's life. After the beatings and the abuse, the kids would try comforting Kathy behind their mother's back. But nothing could stay secret from that woman for long. When Michelle started catching on, she'd force the kids to dish out punishments to Kathy. During one of these eventful punishments, Shane was forced to kick Kathy repeatedly in the abdomen with boots on. After this punishment, Kathy was dragged to one of the lower rooms and locked there for hours, until Shane, he snuck in there and freed her. The sight of Kathy was horrifying. He yelled at her to run away. Shane knew that she was dying, and if she stayed there, things would only get worse. But she was scared of making Michelle angry, scared of being punished, and scared of what would happen to the kids if they were caught helping her. So she just sat there and cried. Nearly a week later, after being drugged and waterboarded, Michelle began convulsing while tied up in one of the lower floor rooms. Dave rushed to give her CPR, but she was dead. Nick and Shane watched from the top of the steps as their parents scrambled. They would later be forced up the steps by Michelle and Dave as the chaos ensued downstairs. The two would tell Sammy about the scene unfolding down there. The following days were a tense scramble of gaslighting and surveillance. Those kids couldn't have been more watched if Subway Jared put cameras in their room. The official story inside the house is that Kathy was dangerous, abusing the children, and her reckless behavior led to her death. If they were to be kept together as a family, they would have to uphold this lie. But everyone knew it was bullshit. More gaslighting from Michelle. To the rest of the world, the official story is that Kathy met a man and they ran off together, never to be seen again by their family, only periodically sending them postcards from odd destinations all across the country. In reality, Kathy would be burnt in the middle of an ash pit on the Knotek's property. The only letters getting sent back were from Dave when he traveled for work. The kids were afraid, but Shane was more than that. He was angry. Whether or not Michelle was his legal mother, she was still a murderer. She took Kathy's life. They not only failed to act, but they were not complicit in aiding her covering it up. Shane knew there was only one thing he could do, and only one person he loved enough to tell. Shane and Nikki weren't siblings by blood, but they sure as hell shared the same scars and bruises. Shane didn't go to school like the other girls, ran away so often that Michelle now kept him in the house most of the day. Nikki was the only person his age that he had any contact with, the only one he could confide in. Shane told Nikki because he knew if he failed, it was as good as dead. But if the two stayed in that home, they would end up just like Kathy, in that ash pit, burnt. They had taken several pictures with Kathy throughout her long stay at the Knotek's residence. Some of these were just normal family photos, capturing events in Kathy's life and happiness, but the rest were something far more sinister. They were recordings of Kathy's brutal beatings and assaults. If there was any chance of justice for Kathy, they needed to get that evidence in the hands of the police. Michelle knew when anything from the house was moved out of place. She was now watching the kids for any sign of dissent, and Shane never managed to ever run away successfully from Michelle. I'm not saying this was mission impossible, but Shane had a better chance of escaping Epstein's island on Stephen Hawking's chair or Bill Clinton's lap. This was basically promised Neverland, but the monsters were inside the home. Shane was furious, but if he wanted to escape without evidence, he needed to get fast. He needed family. And Nikki was all that he got. Well, let's just say Dominic Toretto wouldn't be too happy about how this story ends. This is Criminally Underreported Murder Mystery. I'm your host, signing off. Come again for part 2.